For this panel, unlike for the others, we're going to sort of go back to the roots of this conference and take a very in-depth look at this year's gubernatorial race. It's going to be a roundtable discussion, and to lead that is Carla Marinucci, senior political writer for the San Francisco Chronicle. Carla.
Thank you. This is the hardcore group here, the last group. And we're happy to have you here because we're going to rip the scab off the governor's race right now. They said there wasn't a governor's race, but no. This was, as my fellow political writers will all say, this was the governor's race for the books because of the way it was run. A governor who basically didn't campaign in many ways. Right? We'll have Ace talk about that. A moderate Latino who sort of disintegrated from the very beginning, a wealthy Republican nobody had heard of, who did some shocking things in terms of the campaign. And a Tea Party guy, we forgot, who I've talked to, who has a couple of questions for you guys too. So he's not here because this is the liberal elite, academic and media, but I did talk to him, yes. Okay, so I'm going to let, we've got a great panel here, so I want to sort of change this in the sense of make it more dynamic. I want you all to ask questions of each other. Feel free to get in there. And I'm going to leave extra time. I really want to hear some of the questions. I know some of my fellow political writers out there, and many in the audience have deep questions for these folks to reveal all. So we're going to get right into it. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves in terms of what, everybody, those of us who are political junkies know who you all are. But just describe for the audience and for the record here what were who you are, what your specific marching orders were for the campaign. And from the very start, what did you think was going to give you the biggest headache in the job? Ace, will you begin?
Sure. Ace Smith and I worked with Governor Jerry Brown. Orders, the marching orders, just win, baby. I would just say a few things about this race and kind of referring to what Carla said about, did Jerry Brown not run a campaign? I think he ran a campaign. I think he ran a profoundly new and different campaign, and because it wasn't the traditional debates, press conferences, straw hats at county fairgrounds, and all the other stuff that we're used to, it got labeled something different, but it was a much more modern campaign. I think a lot of campaigns in the future are going to look like this, and I think there's a lot of things we can talk about in this panel, but there's been really profound underlying demographic and electoral changes in California. I think there's been very profound changes in the way that voters and the public receive information, so that I don't think that state and local issues are really the base of people's information pyramids anymore. I really think it's much more national and international news, and that's profoundly affected the way you run campaigns. And lastly, and we'll touch on this, Jerry Brown is a unique character, and he's but it's funny, a lot of folks who had been around as long as him, they kind of overstay their welcome. He's much more like a fine bottle of wine. He just gets better and more mellow and goes down smoother.
A fine bottle of wine. Aaron,
sure.
You want to take that on?
Yeah. My name is Aaron McLear. I was the general consultant, I guess, for Neel's campaign. Met him about 2 years ago, January of 2013, when he was thinking about doing this. So we spent a couple years together on this project. Same thing. Marching orders was to win, but this was an interesting campaign. We'll probably get more into this. We knew it was going to be a long shot, right? I mean, that was not a secret. We knew it was going to be nearly impossible to win. So while this campaign was obviously like any other campaign trying to win, we set out very early on to see what else we could accomplish along the way, knowing that winning was going to be difficult. And so those two things were we're trying to rebrand the party. And that's kind of a generalization, but getting people to think differently about Republicans. Not the party of the old white guys, who only care about big business and corporations, but having someone at the top of the ticket who's a minority, son of immigrants, a middle-class background, talking about income inequality and poverty. We thought that was pretty unique, and that's one thing we set out to do. And the other thing was to draw attention to some issues that we didn't think were being discussed enough. Poverty, obviously, being one of them, but the poor schools and the poor job climate in California leading to that poverty. So that was the goal. And, as long as, and Lanhee will talk about the policies, Neel's perspective was, as long as the policies were right and we were talking about the right issues, the tactics didn't matter. Let's get as risky as we can, as creative as we can with the tactics. As long as they're rooted in solid policy, then we're good. And we kind of saw that borne out a little bit. The challenge is, like any other Republican running statewide, you start the race 15 points behind. And for us, without the support of a political party, and going against, credit to Shonda, maybe the most effective political party in the country, the California Democrats. So that's, needless to say, quite a challenge. But we felt pretty proud of what we did. We felt pretty good about the project. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay.
I'm Kevin Spillane. I'm a Republican political consultant, and I was involved in the independent expenditure efforts for Kashkari. I didn't have any marching orders because, frankly, I spent months trying to get people interested on whether it mattered if Neel Kashkari was in the general election against Jerry Brown or Tim Donnelly was. I happen to feel it made a huge difference for the Republican Party, and I think we dodged a bullet, a very large bullet that would have been self-inflicted by narrowly advancing Kashkari over Donnelly. So it was more chaos and begging than marching orders and order what I was dealing with.
I'm Lanhee Chen. Neel Kashkari and I served together in the Bush administration, and I was a senior advisor to the campaign, mostly focusing on policy. That's kind of where my background is. I'm at the Hoover Institution now, but the thing that I was really responsible for was helping him think through how to fill in, a lot of the vision that he had on policy. Obviously focusing on the business climate, on jobs, on education, and then later on the water issue became more significant as well. But Neel really is a unique kind of guy in the sense that he had a lot of these ideas already. He was filled with ideas, and so the question was, would all those ideas work in the context of a political campaign? And was there any more thought to be given to them? So that's sort of what my role was, and I'm sure we'll talk more about some of the details.
Hi, I'm Dana Williamson, and I'm the Cabinet Secretary in the Governor's Office. So I'm the point person for all of our state agencies. I joined his team in November of 2011, right around when Prop 30 was being negotiated and then put on the ballot. And to tee off a little bit about what Ace said about this, being touted as a boring campaign, it was a non-campaign. That didn't happen by accident. There was 4 years of a lot of things that happened that led up to a non-campaign. So I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that, but a few things, thanks to John Burton, we had Prop 25 on the ballot, so we had the ability to pass a majority budget, which didn't exist before. The governor was willing to veto a budget that he didn't like in his first year. We put Prop 30 on the ballot. We worked with the business community, not against it, so you didn't see a bunch of them coming out in the election fighting the governor or joining with Neel Kashkari because we work with them on enterprise zones and workers' comp reform and other things that they cared about. We were able to do the DREAM Act. We were able to do driver's licenses for immigrants. A lot of things happened that led up to putting Prop 1 and 2 on the ballot as the next, policy initiative to move California forward.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning of the governor's race, and I think a lot of us even forget that this happened. The entry of Abel Maldonado in the race. He was the first official candidate in the race, and this was a guy. When you talk McLear, you mentioned you didn't want this to be the old white men's party. This was a guy who was son of immigrants, high-ranking Republican official, Spanish-speaking. He had some major advisors like Fred Davis and John Weaver on board. I know the California Democratic Party immediately took notice of some of the things he did, like the first press conference he gave in a garage, which is described as his Willie Horton moment. Ace, will you talk a little bit about that and how the Democratic Party sort of went to town on Abel Maldonado very quickly? What dangers did you see with him?
Well, I'd say oy vey. I don't think we thought he was a threat, honestly. He he on paper has promise, but the problem is he was trying to run a campaign out of a 1970s or early 80s playbook. And, when was the last time you saw Willie Horton work? I mean, that was like when I was in my 20s among my first campaigns, working, for the Democrats across the country. So old playbook, it just didn't make any sense, and he obviously ran out of money, but that was just a head scratcher.
What about Republicans on the panel? One of the things that Maldonado immediately seized on was prison realignment. How much that was AB 109. In his case, he made the mistake of bringing up an African American transient and so forth. It was described as the Willie Horton moment. But did you all think that Jerry Brown was vulnerable on that issue? How much did you think that was going to play into this race?
We had a lot of people, a lot of smart people telling us we should make an issue of that, make an issue of crime. We didn't, well, first of all, it just wasn't something that Neel was passionate about. He was really passionate about jobs and education. That's why, that was his mantra. That's what he wanted to run on. So for him, it wasn't authentic to really pick an issue. Do I need to pull this up? Sorry. How's that? So for Neel, it really was an issue that he was really focused on. But if you look at crime, if you look at the drought, if you look at all the senators getting busted in Sacramento, you name it, nothing stuck to the governor. And so that was one of many things that I think in another environment might have been problematic for the governor. But for him, nothing would stick to him. And again, this was not an issue that Neel was really passionate about. So we stuck with what he wanted to do.
I mean, the other issue was. What exactly was it that a Republican would propose to do differently, right? At the end of the day, it didn't seem like there was, I mean, for Neel at least, we talked about this a few times, and the policy alternative seemed kind of weak, quite frankly. So for Neel, he's actually one of these guys where that would make it a non-starter. And so we felt like it was a little bizarre that Abel was pursuing the line he was, but it was what it was.
Kevin, did you see anything there?
No.
And that campaign went down in flames, as you know, with strategists baiting each other and complaining about costs and so forth. And then we see Neel Kashkari come into the picture. And a lot of us in California had never heard of him. In his own postmortem of the campaign, which some of you may have read, Lessons from the Trail, Kashkari said himself, "I thought of running for governor just after the November 2012 election when Governor Mitt Romney lost his campaign against Barack Obama. I looked around and didn't see a deep bench of Republicans in California ready to lead the fight, and I asked, why not me?" Aaron, describe, what was your first meeting with him like? What was that? What did he call you? Give us the whole circumstance of how that happened, how he emerged in California.
Sure. Well, we met through a mutual friend, Steve Schmidt, who had done Governor Schwarzenegger's campaign in 2006. Neel was interested in looking into running for governor. I think, frankly, he hasn't said this publicly. I think he was bored at PIMCO, his job. I think he missed, kind of the rush he got when he was at Treasury, and he was, felt like he was dealing with real problems and was in a position to solve those problems. And so that was kind of the motivation for him. And he came to us and said, "I'm thinking about doing this," and so we laid out, and here's how we ought to approach it. And if you haven't read his postmortem, you're here, so you're interested in this sort of thing. I strongly encourage you to read it. It's at neelkashkari.com right now. It kind of goes through his thinking and how he wanted to approach this. But the cornerstone from day one was authenticity, and that's what he told us from that first meeting, is that he felt like Governor Romney, Ms. Whitman, and some other past candidates, while they were right on the issues, they didn't come across as sincere and genuine, to no fault of their own, but that's just, that was the impression. And so he always said that this is going to be authentic and sincere and genuine, and everything that we do is not going to be compromising our beliefs if we don't get through the primary, because we're on the wrong side of the issues for the primary voters, so be it. And that was kind of what guided us throughout the whole thing.
What was the reaction from some of the other Republicans, the Republican establishment out there, when Kashkari began to emerge, Kevin?
Well, actually, there was great indifference. This race was historic because it was the first time in modern era in California politics that it was a non-competitive governor's race, to be honest. No disrespect to anybody on this panel. We knew how it was going to turn out. Other governors have been reelected by landslide margins, but often those races started out very competitive. And as they progressed, Jerry Brown's first reelection, George Deukmejian's reelection, Pete Wilson's reelection, they ended up winning by large margins. But when in the beginning, they looked like they were going to be nail biters. This was a race that in the beginning we knew was not likely to be close unless something happened. And nothing happened to change that dynamic. So Neel, I think a lot of people were very skeptical of him. I think that honestly, over time, Neel earned, and he deserved to, he really did earn a lot of respect from a lot of people because they saw that he actually worked hard. He did what he said he was going to do. He was thoughtful. He was actually, frankly, one of the most interesting candidates I think either party has put up in a long time. And he was very thoughtful. And he wasn't just doing photo ops. He actually was going to homeless shelters. He was going to centers that are trying to rehabilitate gang members. Seema wrote a brilliant article about him, and he really showed that he was listening, he was trying to learn, he was doing the opposite of what most of these candidates do when they run.
And I know in that first year, he was also spending a lot of time learning about the policy. Lanhee, what was your impression of the guy? How deep was he? How much did he have to learn? You're starting from 0 to 60 there.
Yeah, I mean, he was, I would say he's already pretty far along by the time we met. We met probably in early 2013, also through mutual. I met him in the administration, and then we reconnected through mutual friend Ed Gillespie. But my sense about Neel was that it was interesting because I'd never really met someone who wanted to be an elected official who really cared so much about the details. And usually when you have a discussion with an elected official about a piece of policy, it goes something like this. Here are the 3 things you need to know. Okay, that's fine, I'm good. With Neel, it was, well, there are the 3 things I need to know, and then what are the next 47 I need to know as well? And so that was really kind of interesting about him. I think obviously there is a difference between interacting with federal issues, which was his experience when he was at Treasury, and interacting with state issues. So there was, of course, some ramp-up time, but he was an incredibly quick study. And my initial response or my initial reaction was that I thought he was very impressive, which is why I decided I was going to try and do what I could to help him.
Okay, Asen, what were you seeing out there? What were your original impressions here?
Neel Kashkari?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think he wasn't going to win. That was pretty clear. I mean, he had 2 problems. Problem number 1, he had to get through a Republican primary, and he just barely did it. That took a huge amount of his resources. He said he wasn't going to self-fund. He ended up having to self-fund just to get through the primary, and we knew that he wasn't going to have the resources to ever mount a serious effort in a general. The second thing, too, and it's one of the great ironies of history here, is that the Reagan Revolution, which started here in the 1980s and swept across the country, really, to some degree or another, it settled in other parts of the country and completely mutated to the point where if you're running in California as a Republican, you are really just weighted down by this ideology that folks in California, for a lot of reasons, just don't even relate to and don't understand. And we could go into that more deeply, but it's a huge, really millstone around your neck if you're a Republican running in California, what's happening nationally.
One of the quotes from your partner, Dan Newman, was, a former Goldman Sachs guy who ran TARP, what couldn't they find the head of the IRS to run? Aaron, given that, and the fact that you already saw these great quotes coming out of these guys, did you ever try, or anyone else that you know of, ever try to convince him to run for some other office, given that what Kevin said, Republicans already saw this as a losing battle?
Well, first, before I forget, we broke bread with the SCN guys a couple times and let them know things like that. When Dan would say that, we'd all get a big laugh out of it. I mean, Neel, if you spend enough time with him, he definitely got a kick out of that one in particular. He liked that. When we first met, he said, look, I think I want to run for governor. We said, great. You ought to run for treasurer, and then you ought to do this, and you ought to do that, and then maybe in 10 years you can run for governor. And he said this publicly, and I know that we met with you quite a bit before he even announced, and I think you had that was kind of the first question people would have, like, what are you thinking? Why are you running for governor straight out of the box? For him, he said, look, this isn't a career for me. I don't want to be a politician my whole life. what can I possibly fix as treasurer? The things I want to fix, I can't affect change as treasurer or as controller or something like that. So that was his reasoning.
By saying that, because we'd heard him say that, and a number of us thought, by saying that, wasn't he in effect dissing every elected official in California, including all the down ballot people in his, by saying, well, what am I really going to affect by being a state treasurer or an insurance commissioner? Doesn't that?
I assume that Commissioner Jones is very passionate about insurance issues, and that's why he has run for that office, and that's why he's there. But that's, that wasn't Neel's bag. He didn't think that he could affect the changes he wanted to affect by being in one of those offices. That's not to say those offices don't affect important changes, but those weren't things that were important to him.
One of the first things I know the other team does in either case is vet the candidate. You did it, he did it. What did you come up with? What were the things you were looking for?
Well, the irony is that what Dan Newman said is absolutely true. You didn't need to do much vetting besides just read the first lead in the first article. That's all you need to know.
Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, TARP.
One of the first things, of course, we printed a story, a number of people printed about his voting record, Aaron. Did you vet that before? The fact that he hadn't voted,
You know this, Carla. You wrote the story on the day that we announced, and we very much appreciated that. Not to dig up old history a year ago now. But this whole thing, he was totally open. There's a lot of members of the press here, and Myers, Deb, everybody else. I mean, we met Siders, we met with you guys early on, often, because we wanted to be open about everything. And when you asked about his voting record, we said, here it is. Here's the whole thing. Here's all we got. There's some parts missing that we haven't dug up yet. You're free to dig it up yourself. But like his vote for Obama, which was also problematic, obviously, in the primary. We just decided all the warts, just let it out, explain it, and move on. And I think that you saw Ms. Whitman 4 years ago. It was just a tortured strategy of not really telling you, when she voted. And it was just like it leaked out and leaked out. We said, forget it. Here it is. Let's take the lumps and move on.
Lanhee, your thoughts on you guys down at Hoover have met with Meg Whitman. You've met with just about every candidate that comes through. Was there a sense of Meg Whitman redo here? What were the differences that you saw?
No, I mean, I think they came off to me as very different people. And I've known them in different contexts. But for Neel, he was just always, the word I think I would use to describe Neel more than any is just energetic. And there was an energy and a passion about him that I thought was really kind of cool for someone who wanted to run for office. But, obviously had policy chops to hang with, any. And you're right, we do see a lot of people come through, and some are very good and some are horrible. But, he definitely was impressive. And I think there were a lot of people who were skeptical about him, I think, particularly in policy academic circles. But I think that he was able to win over a lot of fans because of his approach to the issues and how serious he was about them.
I have to ask Dana, I don't think at this point we even heard Governor Brown even utter the name of Neel Kashkari. Within his office, was he doing anything in terms of scheduling, or was there any kind of thoughts about, maybe we should talk about jobs and education or some of the issues that Kashkari was raising?
No. The governor had laid out a pretty clear agenda of his own very early on. The local control funding formula was the first of its kind in the country, and he was really focused on making that work. Balancing the budget and doing all of the policies he was doing. Jobs were growing every month in California. The unemployment rate was dropping. So, I think we all felt like we had a pretty good record to run on and didn't really need to react to anything that Neel had to say.
And when you came down to it, the headline on just about everything that Neel did, all his websites, was jobs and education. That's it. How did you all develop that tagline? And how did you poll it? Why did you think that was going to be the key to this race?
People always ask us, how did this poll? How did that? We didn't have money for polling. Polling was like, Lanhee going home and asking his wife, what do you think of this? So there's no polling. I mean, that developed out of in December of 13, right before he announced, we cut some videos that he did. It was the kind of fireside chat with Neel on different issues, and we were just asking him, what are you running on? Just random questions, just try to get some footage, and he just kept saying, jobs and education, man, that's it. And it kind of had the double meaning of, like, that's it, like, that's the thing, right? And also that's it, that's all I'm focused on. But also had, his view, all the problems, or a lot of the problems, a lot of the challenges we face as a society are because of our lousy schools here and our lousy jobs climate, which again, put those two together and they've led to the highest poverty in the country. And so that's what he was focused on, and he thought that was, everything should be centered around those two issues.
I want to get into the entry of Tim Donnelly in the race, but first, Stacey, I want to ask you one thing, because when the governor announced, the first time he ran in 2010, he announced with that famous video he put out there behind a brick wall and just spoke to the voters. We saw nothing like that this time. He didn't really address the voters in any lengthy way, or did you
Yes,
ever?
he did.
Did you ever?
He absolutely did. I would just say, again, back to what I said at the beginning, don't judge this campaign based upon the notion that a campaign is the county fairs and the debates and the press conferences and all the other sort of stuff. I mean, this campaign actually morphed into something which I think is pretty revolutionary, which was that instead of going out and doing the standard thing and talking to voters and saying, look how great I am, look at my accomplishments, and I just took a poll and let me kind of run on a platform of a bunch of things I'm going to promise you, he ran on propositions 1 and 2. He spent his governor's committee money on that. And essentially the notion being, how about running an election based upon the voters and them, not based upon me, the politician? And I would say a couple of things. I mean, first of all, Prop 1 started at 38%, got more votes, or Prop 2 started at 38%, got more votes than Prop 1 at the end of the day. And what better way than campaign than to actually talk about concrete things which are important to the future of the state in a way that's very issue-oriented, and making that your campaign, and not making a whole bunch of extra promises, a whole bunch of puffery and other stuff that I think voters are kind of tired of.
But we never saw an actual, a formal, this was a departure. No real formal announcement. He what? Go ahead,
He did
Dana.
a letter to the people and tweeted it. That was his formal announcement. Yeah.
Was there any, I have to ask, was there any discussion, debate? Did you film something and not like it?
No, I mean, like I said, really, I mean, the world has changed in terms of how folks are consuming information and news, and it's one of the things I've heard Aaron say at the previous panels, which is that, and hats off, they did an incredible job getting every profile, every write-up, interviews, the whole 9 yards for Mr. Kashkari. At the end of the day, they looked at the polling numbers and they were behind a registered sex offender. So what, and had to spend a bunch of his own money to get past him. The reality is that the effect that all that stuff is having is just not that great anymore, the old traditional ways. And so I'm not sure that the Jerry Brown campaign is the be-all, end-all of what it looks like to run a campaign in the world we live in, but it points to the fact that it is transforming, it's rapidly transforming, and the old techniques don't work.
But at the same time that you were mounting sort of what you said is this revolutionary campaign, Kashkari and on the Republican side was attempting to become a social media maven. And Aaron, I want you to talk a little about that. I think the LA Times, is my buddy Sima Mehta who reported that in the middle of an interview, or at least the LA Times had a profile on him. In the middle of the interview, he took time out, quote, to deal with a pressing matter, a video starring his 225-pound Newfoundland dogs. As we know, Kashkari may be the only gubernatorial candidate anywhere who had a Twitter account for both of his dogs, including himself. What's up with that?
The dog thing obviously was, we saw the Sutter Brown play. We're just trying to run that same play. It didn't, it wasn't as effective. Yeah, he's got two big Newfoundlands, Winslow and Newsom, named after Browns tight ends, Cleveland Browns tight ends. No, his thing on, like I said, the cornerstone of this campaign was always authenticity. I think Twitter was a great tool for him to kind of express that. And so at first, we tried to say, hey, why don't you run the tweets by us first, make sure there's nothing, and that lasted like an hour. And then I remember one night with Myers, he was like going back and forth with Myers on high-speed rail about something like early on. And it was like, as a consultant, obviously that's scary, but he was like interfacing directly, not just with reporters, but also with
Dan Newman.
With Dan Newman, yeah, I had to create a list of people you cannot respond to these people, and like Newman was on it, probably like Salazar and some of those monkeys, but we just there were certain people. It's like you can't respond to Newman. All right, just stop with that. But no, it gave him a chance to show firsthand exactly who he was. He did a lot of Instagram posts as well. But I think it was kind of unique. I don't think you've seen a lot of politicians, a lot of elected officials interfacing that directly with and answering questions just from random people and spending a lot of time having that kind of access. And so with the media, we try to have just full access, and through Twitter with voters, we try to have full access. And it was a risk. But, as Lanhee said, he's a pretty bright guy. He knew why he was doing this. He knew who he was. And so I think it was good.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about Tim Donnelly getting into the race and then to get back into some of the general issues. And I want you to talk about this, Kevin, because Assemblyman Donnelly told me he had some real knockdowns with you, and it was not pretty. And he's accused of the Republican Party of trying to essentially disassemble the big tent. They're saying that he came after him with all guns blazing. What about that?
I think we went after him with a pea shooter, to tell you the truth. I wanted guns to be blazing, but I couldn't find enough people who wanted to put the bullets in the gun. So at the end of the day, and that was one of my frustrations, I thought there was a lot at stake for the party. One of the most prominent, respected Republicans who shall remain nameless said if we did not reverse the supermajority in 2014, after the really, really tough years in 2010 and 2012 for Republicans in the state, if we didn't succeed in doing that, that basically it's turn out the lights and shut the doors. The donors were gone. They were going to give up. They were going to walk away. And the party was just basically going to truly start dying. And it would be dead fairly quickly. So we felt we had a lot at stake. I thought we had a lot at stake. But I couldn't get anyone else interested in thinking that if Tim Donnelly was representing the Republican Party in the governor's race, and that he makes Todd Aiken look like Mr. Rogers, he would be a national figure that would be a hammer to be used against all of our candidates. And if you look at all the seats that we picked up that Cynthia Bryant was alluding to earlier, they were in districts with a significant Latino and Asian population or white suburban social moderate liberals. We would not have won those seats if Tim had been our candidate. And he would have been an embarrassment to all of us. And I think our donors would have walked away. And despite that fact, our donors were not willing. They did not give Neel the support that, frankly, he deserved because they thought it was pointless, so they didn't want to waste their money. And they were not enthused about funding independent expenditures. And what we did was very limited. I would say normally it wouldn't have mattered at all. I think it did matter here because there was such a low turnout and there was so little information about the two Republican candidates and frankly so little money spent by the two Republican candidates that actually $650,000 had an outsized impact on this. And frankly, Aaron did a great job with how they spent their money. We were able to overcome him. But Donnelly, I know him because I was the political director at the Assembly Caucus when he was elected. And I'm not exaggerating when I say the guy is emotionally unstable. He's not just an extremist politically. We're dealing with someone who has some serious emotional, for lack of some, as a kinder word, to substitute for some other things. He would have been an utter disaster and embarrassment. So that's where he and I have had some very animated discussions that are not suited for family publications because of that.
I think the question a lot of us in the media asked, and Ace, we want to know, and Gary South has posed this question, why didn't the Democratic Party at some point just throw $1 million in to help Mr. Donnelly out, help Mr. Donnelly become the nominee, and wouldn't that have helped the Democratic Party all the way down the line? Why didn't the Democratic Party make a move?
That's the sort of thing that would just be a disaster. And plus, it's corrupt.
It's been done in the past.
It's just, no, but I can't think of it's.
What was that, Shauna?
So the Democratic Party can answer it during Q&A.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we will get an answer from you. Let's let Ace answer, and then I'll go to Chandra. Okay.
No, I mean, it would just be, it would have been the fact that this sort of conspiracy, theory stuff even comes up, it kind of gives it too much credit, because it was nothing anyone thought of, considered, or would ever consider. And so I have to dismiss it out of hand.
Chandra, you want to, can you address that? Somebody give her the mic to do that? You want to do that?
Oh, I can say it.
Address it? Okay.
I think I can reject.
Because it has been said that, look, in the case of Richard Riordan, the Democratic Party took an active role.
Yeah. It's been said by a consultant who hasn't worked.
Wait a minute, hold on. Wait for the mic on this one.
Thanks for the opportunity. It's been said by a consultant who hasn't worked statewide since Prop 34, who hasn't worked statewide since McCain-Feingold, who said Kamala Harris would never be our AG because she's a woman for starters, and then also said that Jerry Brown, John Burton, and the Democratic Party had no plan to win in 2010, and that Meg Whitman was going to carry the statewide Republican ticket.
You're talking about Gary South.
That's who you raised. So that's the answer to my question.
Okay.
Your question.
And also, Carla, the notion of the Riordan thing's not even analogous, because what you're talking about here is basically, helping fund like a Tea Party militia type. It's not.
I can tell you, we were terrified of it. That was the biggest thing we were worried about in the primary was that exact thing. And I take you guys at your word that you weren't thinking about it. I'm surprised you guys weren't. Because I thought that, look, Neel knocking off Assemblyman Donnelly, I agree with Kevin. I think that went a long way in helping the Republicans have the successes, to the degree they had successes this cycle, have them, because they didn't have this person at the top of the ticket just saying vile things, offending every possible group in the state. Tim Donnelly is the characterization of everything that's wrong with the Republican Party, and he's the embodiment of what Democrats would like you to think Republicans are. And that's not who we are. That's not who Neel is, and it would have been an absolute disaster, I think, for Republicans, not just in California, but across the country, if Assemblyman Donnelly would have been on top of the ticket.
The other thing, too, worth noting, that just for the factual accuracy here, in what was done in that election it was 2002, correct, was they ran negative ads against Dick Riordan. That's a fundamentally different thing than, what's been discussed here, which I, again, put in conspiracy theory compartment is like funneling money to help someone. No.
You talked about the challenges of Donnelly as it came down to the primary. We're going to close out the primary and go to the general. Donnelly was within striking distance of Neel Kashkari. And Kashkari, who said he was never going to self-fund, pumped $2 million into his race right then. Talk about the discussions on that. Sure. What were the considerations there?
Well, we always advised him not to put his own money in, both in the primary and the general. But the decision was made, and we knew we'd take a hit because he said he wouldn't self-fund. And when he said that, we thought this was going to be a $30 million campaign, which was typical in the past for gubernatorial campaigns. And the money that he had was not going to make a difference. And so that's why he's like, wouldn't make any difference for me to put my own money in. We got to the point where it would have moved the needle. To Ace's point, we were getting terrific earned media. It didn't matter. We were getting beat by a sex offender, and so we knew that the only way we could get over the top was to go on TV, and to fund that, he had to put his own money in. So we took a hit, no big deal. But the thinking behind it was actually going to be significant. It was actually going to be meaningful, and that's why he made the decision to do it.
And, for you folks on the Republican side, I'm curious because Kashkari says in his Lessons from the Trail, and he's right, I earned more press coverage than probably anyone in California the past 2 years other than Governor Brown, yet we were amazed at how little it translated into name ID. Despite all the coverage, in the primary, I was stuck at 2% in the polls until I started paid contact. What do you attribute that to? And what does it say about Republican chances in California in the
Well,
future?
I don't know. It's said anything about Republicans. This is one thing that I think it's not the Republicans' dysfunctionality at play. I think it's a sad commentary on the electorate and, frankly, the state of the media and political coverage. If I was a political reporter, I'd be more upset about that than a Republican. I mean, in April, the field poll, Donnelly was at 17%. Kashkari was at 2%, despite all the press coverage. It's not until you do that advertising, which was the $2 million that they put on Fox Cable, and the mail piece we did featuring Pete Wilson and a Mitt Romney robocall, that those numbers started to move. And they moved very late at the last minute. But it was a remarkable movement with really a limited amount of money for a statewide election in California.
As we go into the general election, I want to say, too, that other people weighed into this race, too. Charles Munger, Karl Rove weighed in some of the leading Republican candidates. Lanhee, can you talk about that? And Aaron, in terms of, you got endorsements from Jeb Bush, Mitt Romney, Secretary Rice. What was the selling point if there was no way, or did you think was there any avenue to unseat Jerry Brown?
I'll let Lanhee chime in. We never thought that. We always knew that we'd have to catch 100 breaks to beat Governor Brown, so that was never, part of it. I think
was there any avenue anywhere?
To beating the governor? No, it was. I mean, honestly, it was never an option unless he made 100 mistakes, which he was disciplined. He's good at his job, and he wasn't going to do so. No, that wasn't a thing. But I think the endorsements I think that people really believed in Neel. I think he spent a lot of time meeting with those individuals, and they liked what he was doing. But frankly, I'd be honest with you, it had as much to do with keeping Assemblyman Donnelly at the top of the ticket as anything. And Kevin can speak to that, and that's what that effort was about. I think that Governor Wilson was a huge help, and the rest of them who participated in that. But I think it was about making sure we had a non-insane person carrying the flag for Republicans, than it was about their support of Neel. But that was also part of why he put his own money in. He felt like all these people who he had just met stepped up, and supported him. And he really felt like he needed to do everything that he could do as well to come through for them.
Yeah, and what I would say to Aaron's point is that for the national Republicans, I know for Governor Romney and for Governor Bush and for others, there was a real concern about how this is going to affect out-of-state, out-of-California races. If Donnelly's at the top of the ticket, it's going to inhibit our ability to pick up seats, governor seats, contested Senate races. And so it was important, at least for the national Republicans, I think, to weigh in. And that was an effective selling point, I know, certainly for Governor Romney. And I'm sure it was for others as well to get involved. Because, Secretary Rice didn't get involved in a ton of races in 2014. She was very selective about how she got involved. And in this case in particular, I know that she was very concerned about what the potential impact was going to be if Donnelly was at the top of the ticket in California.
Ace, you have a question for your Republican colleagues, and feel free the other.
Sure. What I've found kind of fascinating is that this whole notion of a Republican running on poverty is actually taking hold in the presidential election. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you think that's going to work out and what would be different.
And do you think Kashkari actually had some kind of impact on that?
Oh, there's no question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Neel had an impact on showing Republicans that it's okay to talk about issues that Democrats harumph about us talking about. That's fine, but I think it's important that we still discuss them. But Lanhee's been spending the last few days with Governor Romney, who's been talking about that issue. So you might have some comments.
Yeah, I mean, look, the median income in the United States hasn't changed since 1988. It's basically unchanged since '88. We peaked in '99. So the size of the middle class, if you look at the income earned by sort of the middle 60% of American wage earners, that percentage has shrunk from 45% to 35%, right? So there are some real concerns, I think. Poverty, I think more broadly understood as opportunity, is an issue that Republicans have to address. If they're going to be competitive nationally and responsive to the economic times, because the strict jobs message will not work in 2016. That's just when you've got an unemployment rate sub 6%, it's very difficult to make the case that this is going to be a jobs-oriented election. It's just not. And so the question then becomes, where's the soft spot in the economy? And the answer is it's wages, it's inequality, however you want to understand that. And there's a debate about whether there is in fact rising inequality or not, but that's an academic question. I think most people would say you've got inequality, you've got wage issues. And so Neel had an impact on that discussion, but more than anything, the structure of the economy has to do with why it is that Republicans are spending more time on this. And to be fair, Marco Rubio and Paul Ryan and others have been talking about this for several years now. This is not a new thing. It just happens to be the case that we're seeing a convergence of different non-political factors that make this relevant now.
I have to address one of the more bizarre aspects of the primary before we go to the general, and that is the Donnelly-Kashkari debate at the John and Ken studios. What were you thinking? This is the one where the shock jocks had an effigy of Jerry Brown, which they lubed up with Vaseline. I don't want to even go there. A lot of my colleagues were there. Not exactly a traditional debate.
They called you out during the broadcast, didn't they? Yeah, I mean, I think that with that was I wouldn't call it a debate. That was a circus. It was like a Tim Donnelly tailgate party. It was like wild. Remember the guy with the Tim Donnelly shirt that stood up and yelled at Neel, "Go home"? That gets to our point about not having that guy at the top of the ticket. And he didn't mean, by the way, go home to Laguna, just so we're clear. I think that, look, we were going to take all comers. We talked about whether or not to do that. Our approach with John and Ken and other, conservative radio immediately, and this was a different approach than what Ms. Whitman took. Frankly, a lot of Republicans just go in. And so we went to John and Ken like day one, and they were supposed to be on for one segment. We did like 4 segments, ended up guest hosting. And, Neel just said, well, I'm going to go in the lion's den. We're going to say what we got to say and let the voters decide. And so that was, for us, ducking John and Ken debate is not an option. They'll just murder you for weeks. And so we did it. It wasn't, I think Neel did a good job considering the circumstances. But, I mean, how can you duck it? You can't not do it.
Let me ask the Republicans to answer the final question from Tim Donnelly here. And he said, in the end, he said, I got $650 votes. I spent about $1 a vote. And they assassinated my character, and yet they never called me after the election and asked for, my email, my supporters, asked for nothing. Should the Republican Party, should your side have reached out to the Tea Party and conservative at least to try and get some of those people on board?
Well, there's a common misconception about California Republicans. I saw some reporters in this room, even some Republicans think, the more conservative candidate wins. When it comes to statewide elections in California, and yes, there have been a couple notable exceptions, but historically, the less conservative candidate wins. Whether it's Pete Wilson, George Deukmejian, I'm talking about winning the primary. Pete Wilson, George Deukmejian, Elville Younger, Ed Schau, Meg Whitman. In 2010, we had a closed Republican primary. The more moderate, less conservative candidate for governor, LG and AG, all won by double-digit margins. So the statewide Republican electorate is not as conservative as most people stereotype. Now, in individual districts, yes, being the more conservative candidate, if you're in Riverside, San Diego, San Bernardino, Orange County, yes. Usually, you're going to win if you're the more conservative candidate. But statewide, that's not the case. So the Tea Party is not the influence here that it is in other states. It's just not. And Tim is an aberration, not only because of the type of even conservative that he is, because the conservatives who have won, Bill Simon, Bruce Hershenson, are thoughtful, whatever their political skills, they were thoughtful, decent people in many respects. Tim Donnelly, I would not characterize as being in the same league as those gentlemen. So Tim can just shove it as far as I'm concerned.
How do you really feel?
It says, Lanhee, you want to weigh in on that one, or?
I really can't add much more than that.
Okay. Let's go to the general election now, and I think there's a lot of curiosity. I want Dana and Ace on this, in terms of Jerry Brown and how much control he gives to the people, how much control he takes over his race, and how much he delegates. Both of you worked closely with him. Give me some examples of a piece of advice you gave Jerry Brown about the race and he actually took.
What if I see? So Aaron touched on authenticity a little bit, and I think that which is weird because of the drowning kid ad. Like, I kind of don't get, anyway. The governor is...
We'll get into that.
I'm sure we will. The governor is, from the letter he wrote and all of that, that's his style. He's very sort of deliberate. He digs in on issues. And the thing that's great about him is that you can fight with him and tell him he's wrong about something, and he'll admit he's wrong. And so there's probably a lot of times, down the line that we fought with him and told him he was wrong. I think he wanted to do a train trip before the general. We said that was a bad idea, and he listened. So there's an example. I don't know if Ace.
Anything, it's all done by the Socratic method. You debate everything, but at the end of the day, don't underestimate. Here's a person with a long history in not just his own electoral history, but his family's, and has a deep understanding of politics in California. So I was privileged also to work with him on his Attorney General's race in '06. It's not a situation where you're dealing with a candidate who doesn't know anything of what they're talking about, and so of course he's a huge part of the equation and should be.
How did you come to the strategy? What was the discussion about making no TV commercials specifically for his campaign, for going right to Props 1 and 2?
Well, very simply, we need to win Prop 1 and 2. He was the best messenger, and it fit like a glove. Made all the sense in the world.
And Aaron and you three, how frustrating is it to run a campaign where there was no direct response, in fact, no acknowledgement almost of your candidate's existence?
I don't think, look, this is a different kind of campaign. We knew that it would be smart for him not to ever acknowledge Neel, just to do the work he's been doing and be a good governor, and that would, he had no reason to acknowledge Neel. So it wasn't frustrating, it was expected. And so we just kind of ran our race the way we thought we should run it, and didn't worry about what the governor was or wasn't doing.
Neel says in his memo that he thought if I got through the primary, the matchup of me versus Governor Brown would be ideal in terms of flipping stereotypes. In this case, the Republican was young, minority from middle class and immigrant. The Democrat would say our problems were behind us. The Republican would talk about rebuilding the middle class. Why didn't that even sort of make a dent in what we saw?
Well, I don't think anything made a dent because it was a low turnout election. We didn't have the resources to communicate with voters. Like everything else, that was the reason. But he did think that was pretty interesting. Again, a lot of this was about getting people to think differently about Republicans, and it wasn't as much about Governor Brown being an old white guy or anything like that. It was more about look at this Republican, a young son of immigrants, grew up middle class, talking about poverty. We really want to blow people away and show Republicans, future Republicans, it's okay to be talking about, openly in a primary, talking about your support for gay marriage, openly in a primary, talking about your support for women's rights, talking about how it's insane to say we're going to ship 11 million immigrants across the border. That was a risk. That was a ballsy move on Neel's part, but he wanted to go out there and make sure to show Republicans in the future that there's a way to do this. I'm not going to win, but I want to show a path for Republicans to be more successful.
Lanhee, on policy issues, I think one of the more confounding thing was here was this young guy, you're right, son of immigrants, middle class, could have appealed to the younger voters, and yet on the issue of pot, wasn't that an area where he actually could have made sort of an inroad, and yet he said he never tried it, which was bizarre for somebody, in the millennial age group. What was the discussion on that?
Well, I think to get back to Aaron's point, he wasn't going to say something he didn't agree with. And so it was sort of it goes back to the authenticity point. You're not going to advocate for policy. At the end of the day, you wouldn't be for, even if it's potentially politically expedient, which I'm not convinced that it is, but he wasn't willing to make that argument.
Ace, what about the idea that they did try to go after Jerry Brown as Prince of California, privileged, son of privilege? He was Kashkari is a son of immigrants. Were you at all worried that the age factor there was anything?
No, because, fundamentally, when you're running a reelection campaign, you will generally be judged upon the job you've done. And a lot of this election was predicated on the fact that Governor Brown had done a incredible job for the previous 4 years and was highly popular, and people wanted him to stay as governor. And throwing wild charges and accusations, it just doesn't. People just makes people shake their heads. They just don't even get it.
One of the markers, of course, in this campaign in the general was Kashkari's homeless video. As you said, he wanted to be a vanguard on social media. Aaron, can you talk about, and Lanhee, can you talk about the discussions that went down on how you decided to do what you did and to do it in Fresno?
Sure. I'll answer the second question first, so I don't forget that one. And Fresno was just because it was the biggest city. It was the big city in California that had the worst poverty problem. So it also kind of underscored that the Central Valley is often forgotten. Just like poverty is often forgotten, so is the Central Valley. So he really wanted to use Fresno to kind of highlight both of those things. How it went down is the same thing we talked about. He said, "Here's my policies. Here's what I'm running on. Now let's think of the most creative, wild things we can do to draw attention to those issues." And frankly, I think that was a highlight of the campaign. I think it worked. I know that Republicans aren't supposed to care about poor people. We disagree. He really did, and he wanted to show that Republicans can talk about this issue. And the idea behind it was to do something as outlandish as possible to draw attention to an important issue. And I think it was successful. And he was. I wouldn't do that. He literally. A lot of people were. Come on, was he in a hotel at night? No, he was literally sleeping on park benches the entire time.
Were you in touch with him? What can you tell us about just the logistics of doing that and putting him out there on the street for a week?
And we had a camera guy with him, and so they would do like 12-hour shifts, so there's always somebody with him, just for safety's sake. We didn't want him to be totally alone, and so that's how it went down. I wasn't in touch with him the entire week. We allowed him to call Christine like once a day, his girlfriend, to check in, but otherwise I didn't talk to him the entire time. He only talked to Christine and then the two staffers on the ground.
And what were the discussions with Mayor Swearingen with regard to this?
So, just real quick on the Mayor Swearingen thing, we had reached out to her several times during the primary. Like a lot of other Republican leaders in the state, wanted to introduce Neel, and they weren't responsive. We called her on election night; she didn't call back. We did talk to Mr. Donnelly that night, just to be clear. But no, we just never were able to establish a relationship with her. So frankly, it wasn't a thought about how that would affect the mayor's campaign because we just weren't able to establish a relationship with her. If we had established a relationship with her, it might have been different. But again, it wasn't about her. It was about Fresno really underscoring the issue more than anywhere else.
So meanwhile, while Neel Kashkari is out in the streets of Fresno being a homeless guy, Governor Brown is raising money like crazy. And we asked this question yesterday, but Ace, I want you to deal with it. There is some criticism that he amassed, $24 million. I think it's $5 million from the from the Democratic Party, and didn't really lift a finger to help Democrats, or much of a finger.
That's just not true.
Okay,
he did everything that everyone asked him to do, and B, what was profoundly missing in the national elections was here in California, which was a direction and a great message for everyone to run under, and not to mention funded passages of Proposition 1 and 2. I just think that that's a ludicrous argument.
But Dana, was he getting requests to endorse statewide candidates, and he didn't endorse?
He stayed out of the statewide races to focus on 1 and 2 because he wanted that to be a statewide message, but every statewide Democrat won, so I'm not sure how much of an impact that had. He called both leaders, Pro Tem and the Speaker, asked them, how can I help? They gave him a list of things they wanted him to do. He did every single thing. He took money out of his own coffers and paid for a Spanish GOTV buy at the end in certain parts of the state to try to help. So he did do some things. I think the idea that he did nothing is.
But you've heard some Democrats raise the question that he gets some responsibility for some of the Democratic seats lost because by not really being out there and campaigning, you've heard this, Sandra, the turnout became low. It was so low that some of those seats went down. How do you answer any of that?
Yeah, and a couple of things there. I think if you look at the legislative seats that lost, he went out to all those districts himself and did events there. All of those races were very well funded. They had the party playing in it. They had the Assembly and the Senate. And I was listening very intently to the panel before this about turnout, because I think the one thing that's missing in the discussion, because there's this, immediate accusation that if Jerry Brown had run a broader campaign, that it would have had some trickle down effect. But if you look at the voters who voted, I don't think there's a correlation there. So I don't think money would have helped. I think sometimes, people didn't have a reason to vote. And that was the end of that.
Ace?
It's like blaming someone for the weather. Turnout is by and large, really a product of the election you're running and the context you're running, and you can tweak it and move it some, but and also the fact of the matter is that there was, this ended up a very good Democratic split across the state. Roughly, I forget the exact numbers, but about 45, 35, 20, which is a great showing when you slice it up.
But it was low-key in some respects this way. There was a suggestion that had there been more attention on the race, more people would have turned out. And you're right, Dana, maybe that's an unfair criticism. But let's take the debate between Kashkari and Brown, which was held on the first night of the NFL the opening season at a small studio in Sacramento. First of all, how was that settled on, Ace? Who came up with the...
Settled on in negotiations with my esteemed colleagues here. And the fact of the matter is that but also back to this question, it's a lack of understanding what actually drives turnout to blame, try and blame that. That's just turnout. There's a lot of factors that drive turnout, and competitive races do drive turnout, but so should he have gone out and made this competitive race? That just doesn't make sense.
Well, yeah, go ahead, Jen.
I agree with Ace. I think that the idea that a competitive governor's race is going to drive turnout, sure, but then we would have had to manufacture a competitive race. So I don't know how you, yeah.
But on the debate, Aaron, Ace said this was agreed with the colleagues. Did you all agree on this?
If there were negotiations, we weren't part of them. I don't know what the governor's campaign, what their involvement was. We were told when and where to show up, and we did. But we weren't part of any negotiation, or we had no say in any of the parameters of the debate.
I think we have to address an issue that's been raised, which is the suggestion that somehow there was some kind of a deal made by, or you guys sort of dictated. Many of us know our esteemed colleague John Myers has more integrity than just about anybody in the state. So, what's the deal on that?
No, we agreed to a debate, and
And the format and everything?
No, it was also the subject of, my Dan Newman was in charge of all that. But the fact of the matter is that, there's no incumbent who's going to engage in a bunch of debates with a person who's double digits behind them. That's just not in your self-interest.
Did you feel that went? How did you feel that went?
I would say this, and I agree. Look, John has as much integrity as any reporter I've ever dealt with, and there's no question about that. First and foremost, I thought Neel had a great debate. I think that's the most important thing, and I think John and his colleagues managed a very fair debate. Okay, there's not. I would say there's not a more fair or good journalists than Jim Newton and John Myers. I don't know the Telemundo reporter. So they did a great job. And I thought Neel knocked it out of the park. We were really, really pleased. Lanhee And shout out to Danita Ng, our policy director, who really prepared Neel well for that. Neel was totally prepared for it. Unfortunately, it ran on public access TV against the first NFL game, so no one saw it. And that was disappointing, But we were not in a position of having any leverage. The governor's campaign obviously was. I just hope in future campaigns the media allows both sides, both the challenger and the incumbent, to have a say in how the debate goes down, because I think it's important that both sides, feel like they were treated fairly. All
right, well, we may hear some questions on that later, but I think the one point we got to do, and then we're going to open up to questions. I want to leave a lot of time for questions from the audience. The one spot in this race I think everybody remembers is the ad, the drowning boy ad. Dana, you want to talk about what was your first reaction when you saw it? What was the reaction in the governor's office? What did Ann think?
I talked to Ann about 2 seconds after it hit. I have 4 kids. And I had to watch it 3 times before I heard anything that Neel said, because I just was like, there's a kid drowning. This is crazy. And I think that was pretty much everyone's reaction. It was like, why would, and on an issue that was so overblown. And it, and Aaron, again, I think you guys, I believe you when you say Neel wanted to run this authentic campaign, or it was authentic and wanted to do authentic issues, but I felt like the things he did were, really inauthentic, to be honest.
Ace, what was your thoughts when you saw that ad?
Disbelief. No, we were waiting for them to throw a puppy in the water next. I mean, what do how do you top that one?
Well, it's interesting you say the puppy, because it was actually inspired.
By throwing a puppy?
No, by the Sarah McLachlan commercials, with the puppies, right? Literally, that's what Neel said. Neel said, I want the reaction from people to be the reaction I get when I see those ads. I'm not. We can argue the strategy. But that's fine. But the idea behind it. I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you have something else you want to say? Okay. The idea behind it was Vergara was the hot issue in the last month of the campaign. And Neel decided that was the hill he was willing to die on. He said, I'm going to go all out, going to go all in on this issue, because it really matched up well with what he'd been talking about, which was, the civil rights of poor kids was right in line with all the issues that he'd been talking about for the last year. So he said, and it was timely, it was in the news, and so that's what he wanted to go out on. He wanted an ad that shocked people, that pissed people off, because he was outraged about how the governor had handled that situation. Right or wrong, that was his reaction to it, and he wanted people to see that and be shocked and outraged and force a conversation about that. It was effective to the degree in which, when the governor went out on the stump, to the extent that he did those last few weeks, the press asked him about his return, and so I don't think it was an issue that the governor wanted to talk about. And he was forced to talk about that. So, to the extent that it forced a conversation about an important issue, again, that's what the point was. It did that. I understand that people were upset by it, but right or wrong, that was the point.
Kevin and Lanhee, what was your thoughts on, from a policy point of view and from the reaction in the donor community?
I don't have kids. So to be honest, when I saw the ad, I understood what they're trying to do. They're trying to break through. They're underfunded. They're trying to shock people. They're hoping it goes viral. But the folks that I know who did have kids had a strong negative reaction to it, which I thought was interesting. And that was an example of life experience informing your perspective. So I don't fault them for it. They were trying to do what they're trying to do. Frankly, it is an important issue. And unfortunately, again, we're focusing on the trivia of this ad rather than the substance of the issue. It's a serious issue. It's disadvantaging brown and black kids of color. And it's frankly an issue that the governor and others in a position of power should be addressing.
And frankly, it made a serious issue trivial. Yeah, you did. In all truth. That's what it did.
And maybe this is lack of polling, because I have to say that, the Vergara lawsuit was brought by, it's a campaign in itself. It was brought by a bunch of, rich folks who wanted to raise and heighten awareness on what they believe the way the school system will work. But if you look at polling and you talk to voters and you talk to parents who have kids, teacher tenure is not the thing that's wrong with the education system. So I think that Neel actually trivialized an issue, which is our education system in California, by focusing solely on a lawsuit, and then trivialized it even further with the ad.
Okay. Not that I want to get in this kind of a thing, but I couldn't disagree with you more. I've seen polling that shows just the opposite. And frankly, if you're familiar with those, I work with a lot of people involved with the education reform, those evil rich people. And frankly, who could be buying yachts or planes or fifth houses in France, but instead are worried about kids who aren't getting a decent education. So I say, God bless them. Because of a lot of issues, including teacher competency and the kind of teachers those kids are getting in bad schools. So it's a legitimate issue. It's worthy of discussion, an example of why you need to have a competitive two-party system in the state so we can actually get better government that's more accountable, and both parties are trying to be accountable to all the voters of the state.
Yeah, and I would say I think education is going to be a big issue going forward, not just in California, but nationally. And I think for Republicans to start talking about it is a good thing. And, whether this is the hook or not, we can have that discussion. I think clearly there are issues in the state that have to be addressed with the way that the education system is structured and the incentives that are created for good versus bad educators in the classroom. But that issue aside, I think nationally this is going to be a point of discussion. And, the ad was disturbing. There's no question about it. But, at the end of the day, if you can start a conversation about something, that's all for the better.
So in the closing days, we had Kashkari again investing $1 million as the race closed, when it really looked unwinnable. You're his consultant. Did you try to move him to, in any way, talk him out of that?
Absolutely. I mentioned earlier, we tried to talk him out in the primary. The difference between the primary and the general was in the primary, we had to tell him, I think, if you want to do it, it could make a difference. We don't know, but, nothing else is working. In the general, and he knew it was not going to work. $1 million was not going to move the needle, and it didn't, obviously. But where he was coming from, and he writes about this in his piece, is he would regret more if he didn't do everything in his power to do everything he could to win, and he really did. He's a really good dude, this guy. He really felt like all those supporters who he had just met, the governor, and plus the Governor Romneys and Secretary Rice's and Governor Bush's, the people who had just met him and went out on a limb, to support a guy who had no chance. All the donors, who gave to him, knowing he had no chance. He really felt like he needed to do everything he possibly could to try to win, even knowing that he wasn't going to win. So we thought it was crazy, but that's Neel.
So I think Bill Whalen of Hoover has said that for Kashkari, the end game is not 2014, but 2018. What do you all think? Is that what that money was being invested for?
I have no idea. I still keep in touch with Neel pretty regularly. Right now he's looking for a job because he doesn't have any money left. So I have no idea. I think that I do know this. He really is more fired up about public policy than making money. He doesn't care about making money. He knows, he has the luxury of knowing that he, has the ability to make money if he wants to. But I think that's really why he left PIMCO, because he was bored. I don't think he's really into it. And I think that trying to affect change on these challenges that society faces is something that really gets him up in the morning, really fires him up. So I think he'll be back. I don't know in what kind of form, if that's an elected office or some kind of appointment of some sort. I don't know, but I think that he'll stay involved for sure.
I think Bill is right, not necessarily about Neel, but about what Neel was trying to do for the Republican Party. And I think that's the more important thing, which is at some point can we as Republicans be in a position to compete statewide? And we're not going to be in a position to compete statewide unless you have Neel doing the kinds of things that he's doing to set the stage for whether it's himself or somebody else. And by the way, I think Neel is entirely focused kind of outside the public sector right now. But it doesn't really matter whether it's Neel or somebody else. The reality is that people in California, it'd be great if Republicans are able to shift the paradigm. And I think that was a lot of what he was trying to get accomplished.
Ace, could he come back in 2018, or has he changed the game plan for Republicans here? That's it?
No.
Okay. We're going to open up to questions now. Lots of you out there. And I expect my fellow political reporters to put up their hands. Okay, let's start with you, and then we'll, thanks.
Okay, my question goes to the point of doing everything you can do. During the campaign, the general election, and coinciding with the debate, one of Jerry Brown's major appointees, the president of the PUC, was coming under fire, was caught basically in bed with the utilities, and in a pay-for-play scheme, and nothing was mentioned about it in the debate or in any campaign ads. Why is that? And was the governor's office scared of that?
I just very quickly, I mean, we didn't, and Neel mentioned this before, we had our differences, or Neel had his differences with the governor on policy issues, but he's not corrupt. He's not coming from his motivation is public service. He's been, a public servant his entire life, and people get that. Scandal doesn't stick to him because he's not corrupt, and so, like I said, all those, we got 3 crooks in the Senate, in any other state, you try to hang that around the neck of the leader of the party, right? The governor. It wouldn't work with Governor Brown. I mean, no one questions his integrity and his motivation for why he's doing what he's doing. So for us, it was never a question to try those tactics at all.
Neel Kashkari disguised himself as a homeless person, went into the heart of Republican California, indeed a city headed by a Republican mayor, to prove how awful things are. I wonder if you thought about that or what the thought process was. It's a little bit surprising to me that a candidate for governor in a major state with presumably big league advisors would do something like that.
Do you mean doing it at all, or the fact that we did it in a place?
In Fresno, in the Republican.
Well, again, the reason we picked Fresno, it wasn't about what the party label was of who might be the mayor. It was because Fresno has the highest poverty rate, the highest homeless problem in the state. And we wanted to underscore in the best way possible. And that's why we did that.
6 out of the 10 metropolitan areas in the United States with the highest unemployment rates are in California, and they're all in the Central Valley. And so, it would have been a little bizarre if we put them in the middle of San Francisco, which has an unemployment rate of 3.5%? I mean, it would have been ridiculous. On its face, it would have been ridiculous.
Well, I wonder how many Californians knew the statistics as well as you did. You wound up pissing off the mayor of Fresno, a rising GOP star.
I don't think Neel. I think Neel was a lot less concerned about which politicians he pissed off, and a lot more concerned about shining light on the problems that the state faces.
And I like to say her star's a little less shining after how she handled the whole situation too, among many Republicans. Yeah. She hurt herself. She didn't hurt Kashkari.
I, however, think the problem is more fundamental, and it goes back to the question of authenticity. And this rich guy from Southern California, from Goldman Sachs, being a homeless person is about as authentic as me putting on a toupee here on stage. It just doesn't. Not going to work. It's not believable.
Just to counter that, Ace. I mean, I think that you're basically making the point that Republicans aren't allowed to care about poor people.
No.
I don't think that's valid.
I'm just saying the way it was done. I'm just saying it wasn't.
Aaron,
believable.
I think his point is that Republicans who worked at Goldman Sachs aren't allowed to care about poor people.
No, actually, that's not my point.
I think that's
my point is that doing it with a stunt like that doesn't wash.
Because Democrats never do stunts to get media attention or viral hits.
Well, I'm actually not saying that there's a no stunt policy. I'd be the last one to argue for that. You just got to do stunts that are believable. Yeah, I mean, I want my little stunt plane to actually make the loop. It
got him a lot of attention. It was very successful. Yeah. It was one of the high points of the campaign for him.
We'll
and
agree
he was willing to do.
agree to disagree about that.
Who would sit on the street for a week in Fresno
with a camera crew?
Party.
It was the governor who did it.
Yeah.
The governor spent 3 weeks with Mother Teresa when he was on vacation, helping her with the poor. The Governor Brown spent 3 weeks with Mother Teresa helping with the poor, and he's been writing that for 25 years. So he's not immune to some stunts himself. Oh, good for them. I hope they're sincere and it's not just a photo opportunity.
Okay. Ace, you talked about new ways to campaign and that the governor's campaign had some very innovative things going on. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of pressure because it was a walkaway election. But I am curious, what kinds of things do you think we'll see in the future that, could you enumerate what those are? And possibly, since you have also worked closely with Hillary, how do some of those translate into things we're going to see in the future?
That's a great question. I don't. If I had the answer to that, I'd be, I'd be looking to the future. I mean, I think that I think there's some small indicators of what it was, but I don't think, anyone's quite turned the corner and seen what it really is. But I would just say the things that are transforming are, first of all, the way we consume news. And so is it going to be more important to be covered on BuzzFeed than it is in more traditional outlets? Is actually communicating through social media. So, for instance, his announcement was essentially a letter to the people of California, which he tweeted out, which actually made it in much broader, different techniques. And then I would also just, ask a question. I think it's, again, to your point, I'm not sure that Jerry Brown is the acid test for this because he was so popular anyway and was going to win. But running campaigns more based upon the voters, them, than on the politicians. And I do think there's a lot of promise in that.
Let's hear from Deborah J. Saunders, my Chronicle colleague, one of the best political writers in California.
Thank you, Carla Marinucci. Weren't you named one of the best reporters in the country in the Fix last week? Okay. At the one debate, it seemed like these two guys really got under each other's skin. And Jerry Brown kept talking about Neel Kashkari and Goldman Sachs, even though his sister had worked there. And Neel Kashkari kept talking about the governor coming from a wealthy family. How much did these two guys get under each other's skin? Ace, how did he feel about Neel Kashkari? And Aaron, how did Neel Kashkari feel about Jerry Brown and his people?
I know what you're going to say.
Go. No.
I suspect the governor didn't spend too much time thinking about Neel Kashkari. But it was never personal for Neel at all. The tactic there was to try, we felt like, we knew he was solid on the policies. We knew he was prepared for all the questions. So that was the most important thing. But the tactic, and this is why he wanted to stand, frankly. I don't know if we've talked about this publicly, but the reason he wanted to stand and not sit on a stool was because he felt like he needed to be more assertive and more aggressive during that debate, because he really wanted to try to land a couple punches on the governor. We weren't sure.
There was actually a big fight on that before the debate.
Right.
He almost canceled. Kashkari almost canceled. Correct?
Yeah, and it's I don't want to I think we've kind of been through that. It's not terribly interesting to me at this point. But the tactic was to try to get under his skin, and I don't know. You can answer this, but I felt like he did. I felt like it was effective. I felt like the governor looked like he didn't want to be there for an hour.
Well, again, I don't think we'll agree on that. The fundamentals of a debate is if your opponent is always attacking you, you had better counterpunch, or they'll get carry the debate and be declared the winner. So he, of course, had those in his hip pocket, but did it really get under his skin, or did he really bother him? The answer is no.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Tim Hurt, one of the great political writers in California.
Another one. I'd like to ask Kevin and Aaron, I get the notion of wanting to change the paradigm about Republican candidates and the long game being an objective and the importance of preventing someone who would be saying outlandish things as the Republican candidate for governor and how that would play in nationally. But as for November 2014, do you believe that Neel Kashkari got one more vote in the general election than Tim Donnelly would have received?
Paul Mitchell's here. Yeah, Paul's back there. Paul can answer that hell a lot better than I can. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we were gonna lose by 10 or 15 or whatever, we were going to lose, by a wide margin. So for us, it wasn't about, was he going to be closer than Assemblyman Donnelly? It was about, who do we want carrying the flag for Republicans? That was the bigger question for us.
Yeah, it really wasn't about who's going to be more competitive, to be honest. It was about him not hurting other candidates throughout California or frankly nationally, because there was a belief among many people that the national media would turn him into a national figure like they did Todd Aiken. And so from that, it was a plus. And, obviously he might have changed the turnout dynamics as well in terms of giving Latino voters a reason to vote and turning out more liberal voters who were apathetic and didn't think there was much at stake in the election. So we're very happy the way it turned out, at least the primary.
Great.
Thank you. It's no secret that journalism is in a state of near crisis, and I'm wondering if the...
Thank you, Randy Shandeville.
No longer a journalist. I'm just wondering if the lack of political coverage kind of dictated some of the Republican strategy and some of the more far-reaching ads, shall we say. In other words, you're not going to get as much earned media. Does your paid media have to be more attention-grabbing? And how does it change things in general? You're not getting the coverage you did just 4 years, certainly 8 years ago.
That's a good question, Randy. I mean, I think that we would have run a similar campaign regardless, because Neel, again, he wanted to make sure the policies were solid, and then after that, let's take some risks and try to do everything we can to shake the race up with the tactics that we're going to use to try to highlight these important policies. We knew that the earned media wasn't working. That was really disappointing. Even after the homeless thing, which we thought was a home run, the debate, which we thought we crushed, he still was in the same place he was before those two things. And so it was very clear to us, at least in this particular campaign. Now, maybe different years are going to have different circumstances with turnout. But at least in this particular campaign, earned media just didn't do anything for us, and it was all about the paid. And we knew when we did the paid that it had to be things that people were going to walk away from, remembering them. Remember in the primary we did the axe ad, right? And he's chopping the train, right? That was the same thing. It was supposed to be memorable. Supposed to, it was not. We didn't want to have ads that people, forgot about as they walked away. So that's a long answer, but the short answer to your question is I think that we probably depended more on creative paid because earned media wasn't working very well.
Can I just add a question to that? Were you doing these kind of, shock ads, if that's what you want to call them? Because in part, you got no help from the state GOP. I mean, you didn't get, the chairman wasn't jabbing Jerry Brown in any way. He was doing his own thing with regard to his, the statewide races and so the state races, but he wasn't weighing in at all on the governor's race, as we've seen in a lot of other states. How did you all feel about that? Did you feel that hurt your campaign?
I think that Cynthia's here, so it'll be nice, and congratulations to her and her team on all the success they had. But Senator Brulte said from the get-go, and she did this in her presentation, she pointed out there were 3 goals, and one of those goals was not trying to elect a statewide candidate. And so they were very clear from the get-go that they were not going to be able to provide any support for us, which is fine. We get it. I'm not disagreeing with that decision. I think it was probably unheard of that a state party is not providing the contrast with the opponent. I think it'd be tough to find another state party, Republican or Democrat, that doesn't go after the leader of the opposition party. But we have special circumstances here. The Republican Party is just getting off the mat. We're heading in the right direction for sure, but they weren't in a position this year for any support for us or any contrast with the governor, and that sucks. That was a challenge that we had to overcome.
In light of 2018 and the next gubernatorial California race and the possibility that Lieutenant Governor Newsom may run then for that, what kind of candidate is the GOP going to need to come up with to have a competitive race?
Good question.
Living one?
The answer was a living one. Kevin, what?
Honestly, we will have, I guarantee you, in 2018, there will be a competitive Republican candidate for governor. There are states that are much more Democratic than California that have a long history of electing Republican governors. Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Illinois just elected a governor. Our problem as Republicans, besides registration and the guys in D.C. doing a great job for us here in California, is that it's money and it's resources. And I actually believe that our candidate Neel raised for a very small amount of money because the donors just walked away from him, unfortunately. He deserved, frankly, to raise more money. He deserved to be able to get his message out more than he was able to. But I believe in 2018, we have an open governor's race. It's going to be much more competitive than conventional wisdom right now. And I think we're going to have a candidate who actually has a real shot to win. I'm not saying he's going to win, or she, but I'm saying that actually I think that they can if they run the right kind of campaign. And there are 3 or 4 folks I think of that can do that. I'm not going to call them out right now, but I think
Why not? Go ahead.
Because actually, I don't want anyone to take them out before then. So I think we'll just let you, we'll find out who they might be.
Ace, who are the 3 or 4 people that Kevin's talking about? What do you see as the guy who represents Gavin Newsom?
You got me. I would say though that the problems are much more structural, and if you just do the reductive math, what makes it so daunting if you're a Republican in California, you're really looking at starting with a 35% part of the pie, which you have to almost get nearly 100% of it, just for starters, and that's nearly impossible. And then of the vote that's up for grabs, either independents, you're just to get to 50% plus 1, you're talking about getting 2/3 of that. So it's a daunting problem. And what's increasingly hard is that if you look at who those independents are, they tend to be coastal area, urbanized voters. Like the highest percentage of independents in the state of California is in San Francisco, and go around the Bay Area. It starts at 30 and in high 20s, and those are essentially the flavor of those voters is they're younger, they're urban, they're a little more economically libertarian than Democrats, but they're socially, if you're Republican, you'd call them very liberal. If you're a Democrat, you call them moderate. But and they're folks, and the other problems is that the other growing populations, Latinos and Asian voters, tend to be a little more conservative fiscally, but the old, say, anti-tax pitch doesn't work in those communities because those communities are, and the reason why Prop 31, those communities are for investing in the future. They're not just the straight down the line anti-tax, no new taxes ever. So I think it's a steep hill to climb.
We got a couple more. Let's go over here, whatever, wherever.
Yeah, I found the race kind of like boring, but I think I look back 4 years ago. You had like 6 candidates for governor, and you had sort of like a choice whether it was going to be any more likely that any of those choices were going to win than Neel. But at least you had something to talk about besides just 2, and it seems like I'm not sure if this causes the turnout to be less because you only have 2 choices instead of 6 or whatever. But
well, that's been one of the criticisms and you kind of addressed it. Was the turnout so low because no drama? Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, to some degree or another, we like to think that politics happens, in this rarefied little chamber, and it does, politics is about human beings, and you don't go to to a basketball game where the outcome is going to be a 20-point blowout, and it's the same thing here. And boring races are beautiful things for incumbents.
Yeah.
My question is to the Republican side, and this issue about taking inequality as a issue now and riding it. It's a big stretch in my mind, and I think a lot of people's when you have a candidate who promoted TARP, worked for the major national investment firm, and then you have in Washington a Congress that's really bought and sold by the Republican lobbyists. So how do you climb that hill, both here in the state and nationally? I mean, it's wonderful to talk about it, but it's a big stretch.
Lanhee, Aaron said that you've just recently talked to Governor Romney on this one. What are some of the considerations.
Well, I mean, look, it's just as much of a stretch for someone who charges $250,000 in speaking fees to, appear at a university who owns multiple homes as well. I mean, here's the reality of it. There is it'd be great if we could have a real debate about what the right policy prescriptions are to deal with income mobility and opportunity in this country. What I'm afraid of is that we're going to end up in this sort of caricature debate, which I just alluded to, right? Because that's kind of all anyone really wants to hear about. I don't think Republicans are any less capable of making the argument. I think the messenger matters, absolutely. And so I think that will be part of this discussion we're going to have going into 2016 about who the Republican nominee is. But I think there are a number of Republicans that can credibly make an argument about the right policy. And I do think it's up to Republicans also to present not necessarily new policies, but to think about how their policies apply to people and to think about the impact of those policies. Because traditionally we get really wrapped up in talking about the benefits of fundamental tax reform and regulatory reform. I mean, all those things are great, but the reality is that you have to think about how your policies impact people. And that's the most important thing. And making the pitch, Republicans are going to be more effective making that pitch if they're able to do it in that way.
And then to go ahead and actually move on that, to vote on issues like that, bring them to the floor of the Assembly, the Senate, and the Congress. I mean, that's proof of some action on that.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's a good point. I think having a governing agenda for the next couple of years here, since Republicans do have control of the Congress, where they're focusing on some of these issues, would be great. I totally agree with you.
It looks like we got one more question down there. I'll take that one.
To the Republican panelists, how much of an albatross around your neck are the utterances of Republican Congress members, especially the House, from Mississippi, South Carolina, Alabama? How much of an albatross around California Republicans are those folks?
They both want me because I'm the idiot who'll actually answer it. They're like, let's give it to the crazy Irish guy. Well, I've already alluded to it. It's a huge problem. Basically, when you have Steve King from Iowa and Jeff Sessions from Alabama talking about immigration, it's not a good thing for Republicans in California. And honestly, look, what's flipped from the 80s to now is in the 80s, the Republicans were the presidential party and the Democrats were the congressional party. And now we've got the opposite, at least for the time being, going on. Your party is really defined by your presidential candidate. Tip O'Neill and Robert Byrd didn't do a great job of defining the Democratic Party back then. Mitch McConnell and John Boehner, whatever they try to do, God bless them, are not going to be able to do a great job trying to define the Republican Party. What will happen is we'll be defined on inequality, on immigration, on all these issues by who our nominee is. And I have no idea who our nominee is going to be. There are several Republicans who I think can actually address those issues. They can do it credibly. They can move the party forward. I don't know if they're going to end up being the nominee, but if we get that kind of a nominee, we're not going to carry California, but if we can reduce the margin of defeat and we can make improvements another way, maybe, who knows? We might even have a close race for president in 2020, but obviously a lot's got to have to change between now and then.
Can we have predictions from all of you on who you think the Republican and Democratic nominee will be? Let's start with you.
That's the easiest question in the world for me.
I think it's the Democratic nominee's pretty cooked. I'd say this, and Ace and I talked about this before. The good thing is the Republican the candidates will look nothing like the clown show that we had 4 years ago. I mean, outside of Governor Romney, there was no credible candidates, and they basically were, again, like the caricature of every bad thing you think about Republicans. So it's not going to be that. We're going to have small stars. We're going to have a good lineup this year. It'll be interesting to see who emerges from that, but it'll be good. It'll be competitive.
Yeah, I agree with Aaron. It's a very good field, and there's a lot of really talented people. I do think there'll be some people that'll surprise a lot, just because people haven't heard much from them and they haven't heard much about them. I think about a guy like Scott Walker, who I think, has made an impression recently, who will be clearly very popular in Berkeley. Berkeley and Madison. But anyway, so Scott Walker and Marco Rubio, who, sort of known to a lot, again, very popular in Berkeley. But my point is, I think that it's going to be a very interesting discussion when you have sort of 4 potential establishment candidates, if you will, who I think can all make a credible case for why they should be the nominee. And it's going to be a really interesting discussion.
Kevin? Yeah.
Well, after the reaction for Scott Walker and Marco Rubio, let me say 2 words to you. I want to hear the reaction. Ted Cruz, guys. No. Come on. No, I honestly, I have no clue, and neither does anybody else up here. We've got some good candidates. I really hate it when I attend these right-wing audiences that are always, it's an echo chorus for me, and they want to agree with me, and I'm like, no, let's have a debate. No, we have no idea. It's going to be a crazy race. You want to talk about, it could be like 1976 with Jimmy Carter, where, they had a huge field of Democrats that year, some really amazing candidates, and Jimmy Carter emerged out of nowhere. That could happen here,
And of course, Ace ran Hillary Clinton's campaign in both Texas and California the last time around. So we can't let you off the hook. What do you want to say about how she's doing so far?
She's doing great. And I predict she will get the nomination.
I think we're almost done. We'll have one more question here, and then I think we're going to close this out.
I live in the city of Richmond, and I'm just curious about what you think, how corrosive and how evil the flood of corporate money is going to be in the future, because I can tell you I got 1.25 inches of Chevron mailers in 6 weeks, and they lost. And I worked hard for the RPA candidates. I didn't think we were going to win.
Yeah, we had a good point. We written about the $889 million for the Koch brothers. What kind of effect is that going to have in what you all do?
I believe the question was how evil are corporations?
No.
That was the real question.
Yeah.
Corporations are people.
Yeah, exactly.
That was the real question.
I mean, the money and politics question is, I think it's not interesting to me, with all due respect, just because, Tom Steyer was the biggest PAC donor last cycle, giving all of his money, $76 million to Democrats. Both sides have a lot of rich interests, funding IEs, funding candidates. Luckily for us, they both have enough money to make the case that the other side is just funded by a bunch of rich guys. So hey, look, the Richmond Council races were I totally get it. You're exactly right. That was an anomaly. I get that. But generally speaking, when it comes to money and politics, and both sides got a ton of money. It's the same on both sides.
There's such a thing as too much. I mean, Meg Whitman didn't need to spend $140 million to lose by 13 points. And so I think actually Neel did about what she did, spending a lot less in terms of how the share of the vote that was earned. So I mean, $3 million is someone's just getting rich, and maybe somebody needs to spend a little less on that race. No, Charles Munger didn't buy that assembly seat. I actually was familiar with that campaign. I wasn't part of it. He actually competed with the unions and the Democratic Party that spent just as much. And what Charles's money allowed us to do was have an exceptional candidate. While Jerry Brown was winning that seat in a landslide, 24% of the electorate switched from Democratic Governor Brown to Republican Catherine Baker for that assembly. And I would humbly suggest, no disrespect to those here who supported Mr. Sabranti, the better candidate won. And that's what Charles's money made possible.
All right, I think the autopsy is over. I want to thank our great panelists.